As he leaves an old building, a millionaire is approached by a paralyzed girl watching him from the bottom of the staircase. With a firm and serene gaze, she says, "If you carry me up the stairs, I will tell you a secret." Moved by curiosity, and by something he could not name, he agrees. And at the top he discovers a truth that changes everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Boston's historic Beacon Hill district as Robert Blackwood stepped out of the old public building. The renovations he was personally funding were coming along nicely. At 47, Robert had achieved everything the world deemed important: billions in the bank from his tech empire, a penthouse overlooking the Charles River, and respect from the business community that had once dismissed him as a dreamer. Yet the weight of his success felt hollow as he descended the stone steps of the former library he was converting into a community center. Unlike most billionaires who delegated such matters, Robert had insisted on personally overseeing this particular project. There was something about this building that called to him, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the ghosts of his own past. He'd spent countless hours studying in this very library as a scholarship student at Harvard. Back when, his clothes were second-hand, and his meals often came from discount grocery bins. His understated attire today, a simple navy blazer over a white button-down and khakis, belied his status. Few would guess that the unassuming man with thoughtful eyes and prematurely silver-streaked hair was one of Boston's most influential citizens. Even fewer knew of the profound loneliness that had settled into his bones over the years of building his empire. "Excuse me, mister?" The small voice caught him off guard as he reached for his car keys. Turning toward the sound, Robert found himself looking at a young girl sitting in a wheelchair at the bottom of the steps of the adjacent apartment building. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. A pink knit beanie covered what appeared to be sparse hair, and she clutched a well-loved teddy bear against her blue sweater. "Could you help me, please?" the child asked, her voice clear and unexpectedly poised for someone so young. "The elevator in our building is broken again, and Grandma can't carry me and my chair up to our apartment. She went to get Mr. Wilson from the 3rd floor, but he's not home." Robert hesitated, checking his watch. He had a board meeting in an hour, and his assistant had already sent 3 messages about preparation documents. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but if you help me," the girl interrupted with a mysterious smile, "I'll tell you a very important secret." Something in her expression, a mixture of hope and determination, stopped Robert in his tracks. Before he could overthink it, he found himself setting down his briefcase. "A secret, huh?" he replied, attempting a smile that felt unfamiliar on his face. "Well, that's certainly intriguing, but you don't need to give me anything in return. Grandma says nobody helps without leaving a piece of themselves behind," the child responded with unexpected wisdom. "So everyone should get something back, even if it's just a secret." Robert felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," the girl nodded solemnly. "I'm Emma, by the way. Emma Thompson." "Nice to meet you, Emma. I'm Robert." With surprising gentleness for a man who commanded boardrooms, Robert lifted Emma from her wheelchair, cradling her small form against his chest while managing to fold the wheelchair with his free hand. As they began their ascent, he was struck by how little she weighed, like a bird with hollow bones. "4th floor," Emma directed, pointing upward. "Apartment 4C." The stairwell was narrow and poorly lit, with peeling paint that spoke of years of neglect. As they climbed, Emma filled the space with chatter that transformed the dreary passage into something almost magical. "See that crack in the wall? It looks like a river on a map," she said, pointing to a jagged line in the plaster. "And Mrs. Abernathy on the 2nd floor grows violets on her windowsill. They're purple and white and smell like grape candy." Robert found himself smiling genuinely, for the first time in what felt like years. "You notice a lot, don't you? Grandma says that when your legs don't work, your eyes and ears work extra hard to make up for it," Emma replied. "I hear music all the time, not just from radios, but from how people talk, and how the wind moves things. By the third floor. Landing, Robert was feeling the strain in his arms, but Emma's running commentary had him captivated. She spoke of neighbors he'd never meet, of seasons changing outside windows he'd never look through, of stories she'd invented about the building's mysterious creaks and groans. "Almost there," he encouraged, as they reached the final flight of stairs. "How are you doing?" "I'm good," Emma replied, though he noticed she'd grown slightly paler. "Are you sure you don't want to hear my secret now? It's a really good one." "Let's get you home first," Robert replied, curiosity growing despite himself. When they finally reached the fourth floor, the door to apartment 4C opened before Robert could even knock. An elderly woman with steel-grey hair pulled back in a sensible bun stood in the doorway, relief washing over her face at the sight of Emma. "Oh, thank heavens," she exclaimed, her voice strong despite her evident fatigue. "Emma, honey, I was so worried when I couldn't find Mr. Wilson." "Grandma, this is Robert," Emma announced proudly. "He carried me and my chair all the way up." The woman's eyes, remarkably similar to Emma's, assessed Robert with a mixture of gratitude and caution. "Margaret Thompson," she introduced herself, extending a work-worn hand. "Thank you for helping my granddaughter, Mr. Blackwood." "Robert Blackwood," he replied, carefully transferring Emma to her grandmother's arms before unfolding the wheelchair in the apartment's narrow entryway. It was no trouble at all. Margaret's eyes widened slightly at his name, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. "The Robert Blackwood, of Blackwood Technologies." Robert nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the recognition. Most people changed when they realized who he was, became either overly familiar or artificially deferential. He braced himself for the shift, but Margaret simply nodded, helping Emma into her chair. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, billionaire or not, you have my gratitude. The building manager keeps promising to fix that elevator, but it's been 3 weeks now." "Grandma," Emma interjected, "I promised Robert a secret for helping me. Can I tell him now?" Margaret's expression changed subtly, a mixture of surprise and something deeper that Robert couldn't quite identify. "Emma, honey, maybe Mr. Blackwood needs to get going. I'm sure he's a very busy man." "Actually," Robert heard himself saying, "I have a few minutes." The board meeting suddenly seemed less important than discovering what secret this remarkable child wanted to share. Emma's face lit up. "Come in then. The secret is in the living room." Against all his usual instincts, Robert stepped into the modest apartment. The space was small but immaculately kept, with well-worn furniture that spoke of care rather than means. Colorful drawings, clearly Emma's work, adorned the refrigerator and walls, bringing life to the otherwise simple space. "There!" Emma pointed triumphantly toward the mantel above a small electric fireplace. "That's my secret." Robert followed, her gesture, his eyes landing on a framed photograph among several family pictures. His heart seemed to stop mid-beat. The photo showed a much younger version of himself, perhaps 22 or 23, laughing beside a beautiful young woman with chestnut hair and Emma's same expressive eyes. "That's my mommy," Emma said, softly, "and Grandma says that's you. Is it really you, Robert?" The room seemed to tilt slightly as Robert took a step closer to the photograph, memories flooding back with such force that he had to steady himself against the wall. The woman in the photo. It couldn't be. But it was. "Sarah," he whispered, the name feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on his tongue. "Sarah Thompson." Margaret stood very still, watching him with unreadable eyes. "You remember her then?" "Remember her?" Robert echoed, his voice hollow. "She was—" He trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe what Sarah had been to him. His first love, his greatest regret, the woman who had walked away without explanation 15 years ago, leaving a hole in his life he'd tried to fill with work and achievement. "Mommy went to heaven when I was 3. Emma explained matter-of-factly, wheeling closer to him. "But she told me and Grandma lots of stories about you. She said you were going to change the world someday." Robert couldn't tear his eyes from the photograph. "I don't understand," he said finally, turning to Margaret. "Sarah and we lost touch years ago. She never contacted me. She tried, Margaret replied, her voice tight with emotions held in check. Early on she tried. Grandma, Emma interrupted, her small face suddenly serious. Is Robert the special friend from Mommy's stories? The one who gave her the stars? Margaret nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. Yes, Emma, I believe he is. Robert felt as though the floor beneath him had disappeared. The implications of Emma's age, of Sarah's departure, of this moment of collision between his carefully constructed present and a past he'd tried to forget, it all pointed to a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Emma, he said carefully, kneeling to meet her eyes, how old are you? I'm 4 3/4, she answered, promptly. I'll be 5 in December, December 12th. Robert did the math quickly in his head. Sarah had left Boston in April, almost exactly 15 years ago. If Emma would be 5 this December. His eyes met Margaret's over Emma's head, a silent question passing between them. Perhaps, Margaret said quietly, you and I should talk, Mr. Blackwood. There are things you should know. Emma looked between them, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Is it about my secret? Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, Robert assured her, surprised by the protective instinct that surged through him. You didn't do anything wrong at all. In fact, I think your secret might be the most important one I've ever been told. Outside, the autumn wind picked up, sending golden leaves swirling past the apartment windows. Inside, 3 lives hung in suspension, poised at the edge of a revelation that would forever alter their courses, all because of a chance encounter on a staircase and a secret kept by a little girl in a pink beanie. Robert sat at Emma's small, bedside table, his tall frame awkwardly folded into a chair meant for a child. The room was painted a soft yellow, with glow-in-the-dark stars carefully arranged on the ceiling, inaccurate constellations, something he doubted was coincidental. Emma had fallen asleep shortly after their discovery, exhausted from the excitement and her daily medical treatments. She has spinal muscular atrophy, Margaret explained quietly, pouring tea into mismatched cups at the kitchen table where they now sat. Type 2. It's progressive, but she's responding well to the new treatments. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. Robert nodded, trying to process everything. His mind still reeled from the revelation that had unfolded in the last hour. And, Sarah, what happened to her? Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she set down the teapot. Acute leukemia. It was quick. Diagnosed in February, gone by May. Emma had just turned 3. The clinical description couldn't mask the pain behind Margaret's words. Robert felt a surge of grief for a woman he'd once loved desperately, but hadn't seen in 15 years. Why didn't she tell me? He asked, the question that had been burning inside him since he'd recognized the implications of Emma's age. About the pregnancy. About Emma. We could have... Could have what? Margaret challenged, her voice sharpening. Gotten married? Played? Happy family? You were 23 with your first investment round just funded. Sarah was 22 with a full scholarship to Columbia Law. You both had dreams that didn't include diapers and midnight feedings. That should have been my choice to make, Robert countered, feeling a flash of anger. She decided for both of us. Margaret sighed, the fight leaving her as quickly as it had come. She tried to tell you, Robert. 3 times, actually. What? No, she didn't. She just disappeared. Margaret reached into a drawer in the sideboard, pulling out a worn leather photo album. Sarah kept everything. She was sentimental that way. She flipped through several pages before stopping. Here. Robert looked down at a collection of items carefully preserved, a printout of an email, a returned letter marked addressee unknown, and a newspaper clipping of himself at a tech conference with a handwritten note in Sarah's distinctive script. 3rd time's not the charm. Maybe it's a sign. The email bounced. You'd already changed addresses after graduation. The letter came back. You'd moved from that apartment on Commonwealth Avenue. She tried calling your parents' house, but your mother said you'd cut ties with them after the fight about your startup instead of law school. Margaret's voice held no accusation, just the steady recitation of facts. After the 3rd attempt, Sarah decided the universe was telling her something. She was stubborn that way. Robert stared at the evidence of attempts he'd never known about, feeling as though he'd been living in a parallel universe. I had no idea. She knew that eventually, but by then her life had become about Emma, about law school at night while working days, about making it all work. And did she make it work? Margaret smiled sadly. Oh yes, Sarah was remarkable that way. Graduated with honors, got a position at a public interest law firm. She loved being Emma's mother. She was happy, Robert. Without me, he said quietly. With the life she built, Margaret corrected gently. She didn't hate you. Quite the opposite. Robert's eyes returned to the photo album, catching sight of more pictures. Sarah pregnant, Sarah holding newborn. Emma, Sarah in a graduation gown with a toddler Emma in her arms, a life he should have been part of, documented in chronological order. When Emma was born, Margaret continued, Sarah gave her your last name as a middle name, Emma Sarah, Blackwood Thompson. She said regardless of circumstances, Emma should carry a piece of her father with her. Robert felt a tightness in his throat. I have a daughter, he said, the words strange and miraculous on his tongue. I have a daughter, who's been alive for nearly 5 years and I never knew. And now you do, Margaret stated simply. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Before Robert could respond, his phone buzzed insistently. The board meeting, he'd completely missed it. 12 messages from his assistant, 3 from his COO, and 2 from the board chair. The outside world was demanding his return. I have to go, he said, standing abruptly. I missed an important meeting. People are looking for me. Margaret's face closed off immediately, disappointment etched in the tightening of her mouth. Of course, you're a busy man, Mr. Blackwood. No, that's not... He stopped, uncertain how to explain. I need time to process this, to think about what it means. Take all the time you need, Margaret replied, her voice carefully neutral as she walked him to the door. Emma and I have managed for years. We'll continue to manage. The dismissal stung more than Robert expected. Can I come back to see Emma? Margaret studied him for a long moment. That depends. Will you be coming back as a curious visitor or as her father? Because if it's the former, I'd rather you didn't come at all. That child has lost enough already. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. I don't know how to be a father, Robert admitted. I never had a good example. Nobody does until they do it, Margaret answered. Sarah figured out motherhood one day at a time, but she showed up every day. That's what matters in the end. With those words echoing in his mind, Robert left the apartment, descended the same stairs he'd carried Emma up, and stepped into the crisp autumn air. The world looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. For the next 3 days, Robert was a ghost in his own life. He went through the motions, attended meetings, reviewed proposals, signed documents, but his mind constantly returned to a 4th-floor walk-up and a little girl with his eyes. On the evening of the 3rd day, as rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, Robert found himself standing in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of his success. Awards lined the bookshelves. Magazine covers featuring his face were framed on the walls. The skyline of Boston glittered below, a testament to how far he'd come from the hungry scholarship kid he'd once been. None of it seemed to matter anymore. With sudden determination, Robert reached for his laptop and began searching. Within minutes, he'd found what he was looking for: property records for the building where Emma and Margaret lived. It was owned by a management company known for buying historic properties and neglecting them while collecting rent. The building had 17 code violations in the past year alone, including the perpetually broken elevator. By midnight, Robert had made 2 calls, one to his lawyer, the other to his construction manager. By morning, he owned the building. At 9 a.m., he stood outside apartment 4C again, a folder in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. When Margaret opened the door, surprise flashed across her face. You came back, she said, neither question nor statement. I did, Robert confirmed. May I come in? Margaret hesitated before stepping aside. Inside, he could hear Emma's voice, calling from another room. Grandma, who is it? It's Robert, sweetheart, Margaret called back. He's come to visit you. There was the sound of wheels on hardwood, and then Emma appeared, her face lighting up at the sight of him. Today she wore a purple beanie and a matching sweater. The teddy bear was still clutched in one arm. "You came back!" she exclaimed, echoing her grandmother's words, but with undisguised delight. "I told Grandma you would, but she said not to get my hopes up, because grown-ups are complicated." "We certainly are," Robert agreed, kneeling to her level. "But I wanted to see you again. I brought you something." He held out the gift bag. Emma accepted it eagerly, pulling out a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of the Ursa Major constellation. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Is it stars?" "It's the Big Dipper," Robert explained. "Your mother once told me it was her favorite constellation because it always points north, helping lost travelers find their way home." Emma's eyes widened. "You remembered that about Mommy?" "I remember everything about your mother," Robert said softly. "And I'd like to hear everything you remember too, if that's okay." Emma nodded solemnly. "I don't remember as much as I want to, but Grandma helps me not forget." Margaret watched, their interaction with guarded eyes. When Emma wheeled away to get her memory book of Sarah, she turned to Robert. "What's in the folder?" Robert handed it to her. "Deed transfer papers. I bought the building yesterday." "You what?" Margaret's voice rose in shock. "The elevator will be fixed by the end of the day. A crew is already working on it. The wiring throughout the building will be updated next week, and the heating system before winter sets in." Robert spoke matter-of-factly, as though purchasing apartment buildings was something he did every Tuesday. "No one's rent will increase. In fact, I've established a trust to maintain the building and keep rent stable for the next 20 years. Margaret stared at him, speechless. "I'm not trying to buy my way into Emma's life," Robert added quickly, seeing her expression. "But I can't stand the thought of her being carried up and down those stairs every day, or of you having to worry about when the heat might go out in January." "This is overwhelming," Margaret finally said, setting the folder aside without opening it. "I know. And there's more we need to discuss about Emma's medical care, about legal arrangements, about everything." Robert took a deep breath. "But first, I'd like to answer the question you asked me the other day, about whether I'm coming back as a visitor or as Emma's father." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "And what's your answer?" "I want to be her father," Robert said firmly. "I know I've missed nearly 5 years. I know I have no experience. I know it won't be easy. But if you'll help me, if you'll let me be part of her life, I want to try." Before Margaret could respond, Emma returned, clutching a scrapbook nearly as large as she was. "Look, Robert, this is my mommy book. Grandma and I made it together." As Emma opened the book, revealing photographs and mementos of Sarah's life, Robert caught Margaret's eye over the child's head. The older woman's expression had softened further, a cautious hope replacing her earlier wariness. "We take it one day at a time," she said quietly, answering his earlier plea. "Starting today." Robert nodded, understanding the magnitude of the chance he was being given. As he joined Emma on the couch, listening to her stories about the mother they'd both loved, he made a silent promise to Sarah and to himself. This time, he wouldn't let go. This time, he would stay. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries. The elevator in the building now worked flawlessly, and the halls had been freshly painted. But the most significant changes were happening inside apartment 4C. Robert had established a routine of visiting Emma every day after work, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just for an hour of reading or games. Each visit revealed new facets of his daughter's personality, her quick wit, her artistic talent, her endless curiosity about the world she experienced primarily from her wheelchair. Tonight, Robert arrived carrying several bags of groceries. He'd discovered that while Margaret was a wonderful grandmother, her cooking repertoire was limited to a handful of basic dishes. Using his own mother's recipes, one of the few positive legacies from his complicated childhood, he'd begun cooking dinner for the 3 of them twice a week. "Something smells amazing," Emma declared as Robert set up in the small kitchen. She wheeled herself close to watch as he unpacked fresh herbs and vegetables. Chicken piccata, Robert explained, measuring. Olive oil into a pan. My mother used to make it for special occasions. Is today special? Emma asked, arranging the discarded produce bags into neat squares. A habit Robert had noticed she shared with him. Every day I get to spend with you is special, he replied honestly, surprised by how natural such sentiments had become. Before Emma, Robert had been known for his reserve, his colleagues often joking that he'd been born in a business suit with a spreadsheet in hand. Emma beamed at his answer, then grew more serious. Robert, can I ask you something important? Of course. He paused in his cooking, giving her his full attention, another new skill he was developing. Why don't you have any pictures in your wallet? Grandma says daddies always carry pictures of their kids. The question caught him off guard. They hadn't yet discussed what Emma should call him. Robert had seemed the safest choice as they navigated these early days, but her casual reference to daddies made his heart constrict. Well, I don't have children, other than you, he said carefully, and I only just found out about you. Emma considered this, head tilted. But you could put my picture in your wallet now, right? So when people ask if you have kids, you can show them. I'd like that very much, Robert said, throat tight with emotion. Do you have a photo I could have? Emma brightened. Grandma just got my school pictures. They're on the fridge. As Robert examined the school portrait, Emma, in her purple beanie, smile wide despite missing front teeth, Margaret entered from her bedroom, where she'd been resting. She'd been fighting a cold for several days, her usual energy dimmed. Looks like you two are getting along fine without me, she observed, voice raspy. Robert immediately noticed her pallor. Margaret, you should be resting. You don't sound well. It's just a cold, she dismissed, though she sank into a kitchen chair with uncharacteristic heaviness. Can't afford to be sick when you're raising a child. But you're not raising her alone anymore, Robert pointed out quietly. The words hung between them, significant and still fragile. Though Margaret had allowed him into their lives, there remained an undercurrent of caution in her interactions with him, as though she were waiting for him to disappear again. Grandma, Emma interjected, Robert's making chicken piccata, and, guess what, he's going to put my picture in his wallet. Margaret's expression softened. Is that so? I was thinking, Robert ventured, slicing lemons with practiced precision, that Emma might like to see where I work tomorrow. If you're not feeling well, I could pick her up from school and take her to my office for the afternoon. We have an accessible building, and my assistant already stocked my office with games and books. The look of delight on Emma's face made Robert's heart swell, but it was Margaret's response he waited for, aware that he was asking for a significant leap of faith. Margaret studied him for a long moment before answering. I suppose that would be all right. Her last treatment appointment this week isn't until Thursday. Can I, Grandma? Please? Emma clasped her hands together in supplication. Yes, but you must promise to tell Robert if you get tired. No pushing yourself. I promise. Emma's excitement was palpable as she wheeled back and forth in a small victory dance. As Robert resumed cooking, directing Emma in simple tasks like tearing lettuce for the salad, he felt a strange sense of rightness, as though he'd finally found his place in the world. Not in boardrooms or investment meetings, but here in this modest kitchen with his daughter. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Robert sat with Margaret in the living room, the day's Boston Globe open between them as they shared sections. Another small ritual they'd established. I spoke with my lawyer today, Robert said, breaking the companionable silence, about establishing Emma's legal status as my daughter. Margaret lowered her newspaper. I assumed you would eventually. I want to do this right, Margaret. I want Emma to have everything she deserves, not just financially, but legally. Security, certainty. And what exactly are you proposing? Her tone was carefully neutral. DNA testing to establish paternity, then legal recognition. She would remain Emma Thompson unless someday you both wanted otherwise, but she would legally be my heir, entitled to my support, my insurance, everything. Margaret nodded slowly. And custody arrangements? I'm not looking to take her from you, Robert assured her quickly. You're her grandmother, her constant. She needs you. But but I would like formal visitation rights and perhaps, as we all adjust, occasional overnights at my place. I've already begun modifying my penthouse to be fully accessible." Margaret folded the newspaper deliberately, buying time. "You're moving very quickly, Robert. I have nearly 5 years to make up for. That's not how parenting works. You can't accelerate the process to catch up." Robert felt a flash of frustration. "What would you have me do then? Stay on the periphery of her life, see her only when it's convenient? I want to be her father, Margaret, not an occasional visitor." "And what happens when the novelty wears off?" Margaret challenged, her voice strengthening despite her illness. "When board meetings run late? When investors need hand-holding? When the next big acquisition demands your attention? Emma isn't a project you can delegate or reschedule." The accusation stung because it targeted Robert's deepest fear, that he would fail Emma as his own father had failed him. "I know that." "Do you? Because from where I sit, you've spent 20 years building a life that revolves entirely around your work. Old habits don't change overnight. They can when something matters enough," Robert countered. "Emma matters enough." Margaret's expression softened. "I believe you mean that now. I'm just not convinced you understand what you're signing up for." "Then help me understand," Robert pleaded, leaning forward. "I'm trying, Margaret. I'm not asking to replace you. I'm asking to be included." Margaret studied him, years of hard-earned wisdom in her gaze. "You know, Sarah always believed you would have been a good father, if given the chance. She used to tell Emma stories about your kindness, your determination, the brilliant, gentle man behind the business success." "She said that even after, Margaret confirmed. "Sarah didn't believe in bitterness. She said it was a poison you pour for another, that you end up drinking yourself." Robert felt the familiar ache of loss for the woman he'd never truly gotten to know. She became quite philosophical. "Motherhood does that to you," Margaret said, with a small smile. "As for your legal proposals, yes, I think establishing paternity and support is appropriate. The rest, we'll take it day by day." "Thank you," Robert said sincerely, "for giving me a chance, for keeping Sarah's memory alive, for Emma, for everything." Margaret nodded, then changed the subject. "This treatment Emma's on, it's experimental. Insurance covers part, but it's still thousands each month. I've been dipping into Sarah's life insurance, but that won't last forever." "I'll cover everything," Robert said immediately. "Medical expenses, education fund, therapies, whatever she needs." "I won't take your money for myself," Margaret stated firmly. "I have my pension and social security. It's enough." "I respect that," Robert replied, understanding her pride. "But perhaps you'd let me set up a household account for groceries, utilities, things we all benefit from when I'm here." Margaret considered this compromise. That would be acceptable. Their negotiation was interrupted by a small sound from the hallway. Both adults turned to find Emma in her wheelchair. Teddy bear clutched tight against her nightgown. "Emma, sweetheart, you should be sleeping," Margaret said, rising despite her weariness. "I had a dream about Mommy," Emma said, her voice small. "She was showing me how to make paper boats, but I couldn't remember if they were supposed to be pointy or flat on the bottom." Robert and Margaret exchanged glances, the previous tension evaporating in the face of Emma's distress. "Come here, sweetie," Margaret beckoned. As Emma wheeled forward, Robert noticed the exhaustion etched in Margaret's face as she bent to embrace her granddaughter. "Why don't I take her back to bed?" he suggested gently. "I actually know how to make paper boats. My grandfather taught me when I was about your age," he added to Emma. "I could show you." "Really?" Emma's face brightened through her tears. With a grateful nod from Margaret, Robert wheeled Emma back to her bedroom. He found paper on her desk and, sitting beside her bed, demonstrated the simple folds that transformed a flat sheet into a seaworthy vessel. "See? The bottom needs to be flat so it can float properly," he explained, placing the finished boat in her hands. "Can we sail it tomorrow? In a real puddle?" "If it's raining, absolutely," Robert promised. "Now, how about I tell you a story to help? You get back to sleep?" Emma settled against her pillows, eyes already growing heavy. "Tell me about when you and Mommy were young." Robert carefully tucked the blankets around her small form, marveling at how natural this felt, as though he'd been putting her to bed every night of her life. "Well, I met your mother in a literature class at Harvard. She was the smartest person in the room, and she wasn't afraid to disagree with the professor." As he recounted the story of his first encounter with Sarah, watching Emma drift back to sleep, Robert experienced a profound sense of connection, not just to his daughter, but to Sarah, to the life they might have shared, to the person he might have become years earlier if circumstances had been different. When he was certain Emma was asleep, Robert carefully adjusted her blankets one last time and whispered, "I love you, Emma. Sweet dreams." It was the first time he'd said those words aloud to her, though he'd felt them growing in his heart from the moment he'd carried her up those stairs. As he turned to leave, he was startled to find Margaret standing in the doorway, watching them with tear-filled eyes. "She looks so much like Sarah when she sleeps," Margaret whispered as they moved back toward the living room. "It catches me off guard sometimes." "I see both of us in her," Robert admitted. "My eyes, Sarah's smile, it's miraculous." Margaret nodded, then said quietly, "You can pick her up after school tomorrow, 3 o'clock at the Callahan Elementary. On Tremont Street. They know me there, so I'll call ahead to add you to the approved pickup list." The simple statement represented an enormous act of trust, and Robert recognized it as such. "Thank you, Margaret. I promise I'll take good care of her." "I know you will," Margaret replied, and for the first time since they'd met, Robert felt she truly meant it. The Blackwood Technologies headquarters stood like a gleaming monolith against the Boston skyline, its glass facade reflecting clouds and blue sky. In the executive parking garage beneath the building, Robert helped Emma from his Tesla into her wheelchair, watching her eyes widen as she took in her surroundings. "Your building is so big," she breathed, neck craned to see the upper floors as they approached the entrance. "Do you own the whole thing?" "Just the top 10 floors, Robert replied, feeling slightly self-conscious about his wealth in a way he never had before. "The rest is rented to other companies." As they entered the lobby, Emma's presence created a ripple effect. Security guards, who normally maintained professional detachment, broke into smiles. The receptionist, who'd worked for Robert for 7 years and had never seen him with a child, did a double-take. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," she greeted, her curious gaze shifting to Emma. "Melissa, this is Emma Thompson," Robert said, resting a hand lightly on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, this is Ms. Cordova, who keeps this whole place running smoothly." "It's very nice to meet you, Ms. Cordova," Emma said with the carefully enunciated politeness of a child who's been well taught. "Your earrings are beautiful." Melissa touched her dangling silver earrings, clearly charmed. "Thank you, Emma. That's very kind of you to notice." As they moved toward the executive elevator, Robert was acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them. In 15 years of building his company, he had never brought a child to the office. Not his own, not a relative's, not for any bring your child to work day. His private life had remained exactly that. Private. The executive floor fell silent as they emerged from the elevator. Robert's assistant, Jason, who prided himself on never being surprised, stood frozen behind his desk, mouth slightly open. "Jason, this is Emma," Robert said simply, ignoring the stunned expressions of nearby executives who had paused in the hallway. "We'll be in my office for the afternoon. Hold all my calls unless it's an emergency." "Of course, sir," Jason recovered quickly, professional mask sliding back into place. "It's lovely to meet you, Emma." Emma smiled shyly, suddenly quieter, in the face of so many adult stares. Robert felt a surge of protectiveness as he ushered her toward his office suite. Once inside with the door closed, Emma relaxed visibly. "Wow," she breathed, taking in the panoramic views of Boston Harbor. "You can see everything from here." "It is quite a view," Robert agreed, seeing his familiar surroundings through fresh eyes. "Would you like to explore?" For the next hour, Robert showed Emma around his office, the conference room where he took important meetings, the small kitchen where his staff prepared meals, the collection of technological innovations his company had pioneered displayed in illuminated cases along one wall. "What's this one?" Emma asked, pointing to a small device that resembled a wristwatch. That was our first major product, Robert explained. It monitors heart rate, blood pressure, and other vital signs, then sends alerts if something seems wrong. Hospitals and nursing homes use them for patients who need constant monitoring. Emma studied it thoughtfully. Like me when I have my treatments? Robert nodded, once again struck by her perceptiveness. Exactly like that, in fact. He hesitated, an idea forming. Would you like to see our research lab? That's where we're developing new medical devices. Emma's enthusiastic agreement led them back to the elevator and down to the R&D floor, where teams of engineers and scientists worked on Blackwood Technologies' next innovations. Unlike the hushed atmosphere of the executive floor, the lab buzzed with activity. People in lab coats discussing designs, 3D printers humming as they created prototypes, screens displaying complex diagrams and data. Mr. Blackwood, a young woman with curly hair pulled back in a ponytail, approached them. "We weren't expecting you today." "Dr. Chen, this is Emma," Robert introduced. "She's my daughter, and she's interested in seeing what we do here." The words, "my daughter," felt both foreign and right on his tongue. It was the first time he'd introduced Emma this way to anyone at the company, and he noticed how her face lit up at the designation. If Dr. Chen was surprised by this revelation, she hid it well. "It's wonderful to meet you, Emma. Would you like to see what I'm working on?" For the next 2 hours, they toured the lab with various team members showing Emma their projects. Robert observed with pride as his daughter asked insightful questions, her natural intelligence shining through. When Dr. Chen demonstrated a robotic arm designed to assist with physical therapy, Emma's face grew thoughtful. "Could something like that help people like me," she asked, "to exercise our muscles even when we can't move them ourselves?" Dr. Chen glanced at Robert, then back to Emma. "That's actually one of the applications we're exploring. Would you like to see the pediatric prototype?" As they followed Dr. Chen to another section of the lab, Robert's mind raced. He'd founded Blackwood Technologies with a mission to create accessible medical technology. But somehow, in the years of growth and expansion, the focus had shifted to more profitable ventures. Emma's simple question had crystallized something he'd been feeling for months, a disconnection from the company's original purpose. The pediatric prototype was smaller, designed with colorful components and a user interface that resembled a video game. "We're still in early development," Dr. Chen explained, "but the idea is to make physical therapy engaging enough that children will want to do their exercises." Emma's eyes shone with interest. "It looks like fun. Do you think it could help me get stronger?" "Possibly," Dr. Chen replied carefully, "but we're still several years from clinical trials." "What would it take to accelerate the timeline?" Robert asked, the businessman in him calculating resources, budget allocations, regulatory hurdles. Dr. Chen looked surprised by the question. "Well, we'd need to expand the team, increase funding for this division, prioritize the regulatory process." "Make it happen," Robert said decisively. "I want a proposal on my desk tomorrow morning. This becomes a priority project." As they left the lab an hour later, Emma was uncharacteristically quiet. In the elevator back to the executive floor, Robert knelt beside her wheelchair. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "Did you really mean it? About making that robot arm a priority because of me?" "Yes," Robert answered honestly, "but not just because of you, because it's the right direction for the company. Sometimes we need someone to help us see what's been in front of us all along." Emma nodded, processing this. Dr. Chen seemed surprised. "I've been focused on other aspects of the business lately," Robert admitted. "The medical innovations were how we started, but we've diversified into many areas. But the medical stuff helps people the most, right?" The simple question pierced Robert's carefully constructed business philosophy. For years, he'd justified the company's pivot toward more profitable ventures as necessary for growth, for shareholder value, for long-term sustainability. But Emma's four-word question cut through all of that. "Yes," he said finally. "It helps people the most." When they returned to his office, Robert found a stack of contracts requiring his immediate attention. Emma, sensing his dilemma, wheeled herself to the small sitting area where Jason had thoughtfully arranged art supplies and books. "You can do your work," she offered. "I'll draw for a while." For the next hour, Robert alternated between reviewing documents and watching Emma, who was deeply absorbed in creating an elaborate drawing. The juxtaposition of his corporate responsibilities and his newfound role as a father created a strange dissonance, as though two separate lives were attempting to merge into one. When his COO, Patricia Winters, knocked and entered without waiting for a response, her usual practice, the worlds collided more directly. "Robert, we need to discuss the Harper acquisition. The numbers from the latest—" Patricia stopped mid-sentence, finally noticing Emma. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had a visitor." "Patricia, this is Emma Thompson," Robert said, standing. "Emma, this is Ms. Winters, who helps me run the company." Emma looked up from her drawing and smiled politely. "Hello, Ms. Winters. Are you here about the robot arms that help kids exercise?" Patricia blinked in confusion. "Robot arms? No. I'm here about a company acquisition." "Oh." Emma's interest visibly waned as she returned to her drawing. "Emma is my daughter," Robert added quietly, watching comprehension dawn on Patricia's face. They had worked together for over a decade, through countless crises and triumphs. She knew better than most how completely Robert had dedicated himself to the company, to the exclusion of personal relationships. See?" Patricia managed, professional enough not to ask the obvious questions. "Perhaps we should discuss the Harper matter later." "Actually," Robert replied, making a decision, "I'd like to hear your thoughts on redirecting resources to accelerate the Pediatric Mobility Assistance Project in R&D. Dr. Chen will be submitting a proposal tomorrow." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "That project? But we decided last quarter to maintain it at minimal funding levels since the ROI projections were—" "I'm aware of what we decided," Robert interrupted. "I'm suggesting we reconsider. Not every project should be evaluated solely on return on investment." The statement, heretical in their profit-driven corporate culture, hung in the air between them. Patricia looked from Robert to Emma and back again, visibly recalibrating. "I'll review Dr. Chen's proposal when it comes in," she said finally, "and I'll have my team look at where we might free up resources." After Patricia left, Robert turned to find Emma watching him thoughtfully. "Is Ms. Winters mad at you now?" she asked. "No, just surprised," Robert assured her. "Sometimes when you run a company for a long time, you get stuck in certain ways of thinking. It takes something special to help you see things differently." Emma nodded as though this made perfect sense. "Like how Grandma says you need new glasses when the world starts looking blurry." "Exactly like that," Robert agreed with a smile. By late afternoon, Emma was visibly tiring, though she tried to hide it. Robert noticed her increasingly frequent pauses while coloring, the slight droop of her shoulders. "I think it's time we headed home," he suggested gently. "We can stop for ice cream on the way if you'd like." Emma's face brightened at the prospect. As they prepared to leave, she proudly presented him with her completed drawing, a detailed rendering of the Blackwood Technologies building, but with fantastical additions, a rainbow bridge connecting it to other buildings, flowers growing from windows, and small figures that Robert recognized as himself and Emma standing at the top. "It's your building, but happier," she explained. "See, I added colors and people and places for birds to rest." "It's beautiful," Robert said sincerely, studying the artwork. "May I keep it? I'd like to frame it for my office." Emma beamed at the suggestion. As they left, Robert instructed Jason to have the drawing professionally framed first thing in the morning. On their way out, they encountered several more curious stares from employees unaccustomed to seeing their CEO with a child. Robert found he didn't mind. In fact, he felt a strange pride in being seen with Emma, in acknowledging this new dimension of his identity. In the car, as they headed toward Emma's favorite ice cream shop, she grew contemplative again. "Robert." "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you going to tell everyone at your company that I'm your daughter now?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. "Yes," he answered after a moment, "if that's okay with you and your grandmother." Emma nodded slowly. "And will I get to have your last name too, like Mommy gave me in the middle?" Robert gripped the steering wheel tighter, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Would you like that?" "I think so," Emma replied thoughtfully. "Then when people ask, I could say I'm Emma Blackwood, and they'd know I belong with you." "You belong with me no matter what your name is," Robert assured her, voice rough with feeling. "But yes, if you and your grandmother agree, we could make Blackwood your last name legally." Emma smiled, satisfied with this answer. As they pulled up to the ice cream shop, she asked one more question. "Does this mean I can call you Dad instead of Robert?" The simple question nearly undid him. "I would be honored if you called me Dad," he managed to say past the lump in his throat. "Okay," Emma decided, "but maybe not all at once. Maybe I'll practice sometimes to get used to it." "That sounds perfect," Robert agreed, helping her from the car. "Take all the time you need." As they entered the shop, Emma already discussing which flavors she might try, Robert felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The day had changed them both, had changed their relationship, had changed his perception of his company and himself. It was as though he'd been living in black and white for years, and Emma had suddenly introduced color to his world. Later, as he carried a sleeping Emma up to apartment 4C, despite the working elevator, she had fallen asleep in the car, he realized that for the first time in decades, he hadn't checked the stock market once all day. Somehow, it no longer seemed like the most important measure of success. The morning of Emma's 5th birthday dawned with a crystalline December clarity that belied the chaos inside Robert's penthouse. For weeks, he'd been planning this day with a level of detailed strategy usually reserved for corporate mergers. Now, with just hours before guests would arrive, he surveyed the transformation of his once minimalist living space with equal parts pride and trepidation. "The banner is crooked," Patricia observed, balancing precariously on a stepladder as she adjusted the Happy Birthday Emma sign. In the 6 weeks since meeting Emma, Robert's COO had unexpectedly become one of the child's most devoted admirers. 2 inches higher on the left, Robert directed, his perfectionism extending to party decorations as it did to quarterly reports. "Jason, how's the cake situation?" His assistant, clipboard in hand, looked up from checking items off his meticulously organized list. "Bakery confirmed delivery for noon. 3 tiers, constellation theme, non-dairy frosting." As requested, Robert nodded, mentally reviewing the guest list one more time. Emma had wanted a small celebration. Just her closest friends from school, her medical team, and what she called her work friends, meaning the Blackwood Technologies employees she'd befriended during her now regular visits to the office. Margaret would be bringing Emma at 1 o'clock, giving Robert these final hours to ensure everything was perfect. The fact that Margaret had agreed to let him host Emma's birthday party represented a significant milestone in their evolving relationship. Over the past weeks, as Robert had proven his commitment through consistent presence and unwavering support, Margaret's wariness had gradually given way to cautious partnership. "The gift table looks empty," Robert fretted, studying the elegantly arranged table by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "That's because you stored most of the gifts in your home office," Jason reminded him patiently. "The developmental specialist advised against overwhelming her with too many presents at once, remember?" Robert did remember. It was one of many consultations he'd had with experts in child development and pediatric SMA in recent weeks. His approach to fatherhood mirrored his approach to business. Identify the knowledge gaps, find the best experts, implement their recommendations meticulously. But there was one aspect of parenting that no expert could help with: the emotional landscape he now navigated daily. The fierce protectiveness he felt when Emma struggled with her physical limitations, the profound joy that bubbled up at her accomplishments, the bone-deep terror that occasionally gripped him in the middle of the night, fear that he would fail, her somehow that he wasn't equipped to be the father she deserved. "Mr. Blackwood," Jason's voice pulled him from his thoughts, "the photographer is here for setup." The party preparations continued at a frenetic pace, with Robert's corporate team demonstrating the same efficiency in arranging children's party games as they did in orchestrating board meetings. By 12:30, the penthouse had been transformed. into an enchanted celestial wonderland with twinkling lights, constellation projections on the walls, and delicate star-shaped confetti dusting the surfaces. At precisely 1 o'clock, the private elevator announced an arrival. Robert straightened his casual sweater, chosen specifically because Emma had once commented that his suits made him look too serious, and moved to greet them. The doors opened to reveal Margaret pushing Emma's wheelchair. Emma wore a silver dress that sparkled with every movement, a matching headband replacing her usual beanie, and an expression of wide-eyed wonder as she took in the decorated space. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Robert said, kneeling to her level. "Dad!" Emma exclaimed, using the title that had become increasingly natural over the past weeks. "This is amazing. It looks like the inside of a galaxy." "Wait until you see the cake," he replied with a conspiratorial wink. "It has actual edible stars." As he... Margaret helped Emma with her coat. Robert noticed the older woman's pallor. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked quietly, while Emma was distracted by Patricia showing her the activity stations. "Just tired," Margaret assured him, though her expression suggested otherwise. Nothing to worry about on Emma's special day. Before Robert could press further, the elevator announced more arrivals. Emma's friends from school, their parents in tow. Soon the penthouse filled with the sounds of children's laughter and excited chatter, the space more alive than it had been in all the years Robert had owned it. He watched as Emma held court among her friends, her wheelchair no impediment to her social confidence. She directed games with natural authority, ensuring everyone had turns and felt included. In these moments, Robert saw Sarah in her, the same charisma, the same instinctive understanding of people that had drawn him to her mother all those years. "Oh, she's quite extraordinary," said a voice beside him. Dr. Maxwell, Emma's neurologist, had joined him near the refreshment table. "Her cognitive development is off the charts, you know." "She gets that from her mother," Robert replied, unable to take his eyes off his daughter as she laughed with her friends. Sarah was brilliant. "Perhaps," Dr. Maxwell acknowledged, "but that analytical approach to problem-solving? That's all. You, Mr. Blackwood, I've read about your methods in the business journals." The observation caught Robert by surprise. He'd been so focused on Emma's similarities to Sarah that he hadn't fully considered which traits might have come from him. "The new treatment protocol is showing promising results," Dr. Maxwell continued. "Her muscle strength has improved 7% since we adjusted the dosage last month." "And the long-term prognosis?" Robert asked, the question that constantly hovered at the edges of his mind. Dr. Maxwell's expression turned measured. "SMA is still a progressive condition, Mr. Blackwood, but with these new therapies, the progression has slowed significantly. Emma may maintain her current level of function for many years, and with the pace of medical advancement..." He left, the sentence unfinished, offering neither false hope nor unnecessary pessimism. Robert nodded, processing this information as he always did, acknowledging the reality while immediately calculating next steps. "I've been meaning to talk to you about a research initiative at my company, Pediatric Mobility Assistance Technology." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the cake table. Emma was calling for everyone's attention, her face alight with excitement. "Before we have cake, I want to show everyone something." The room quieted as Emma wheeled herself to an open area of the living room. With deliberate concentration, she positioned her wheelchair, then looked to her physical therapist, who stood nearby with an encouraging smile. "Ready?" the therapist asked, quietly. Emma nodded, determination evident in every line of her small body. Slowly, with the therapist's hands hovering but not touching, Emma pushed herself to a standing position using the specialized armrests of her new wheelchair, a custom design Robert had commissioned after consulting with her medical team. Collective breath held in the room as Emma stood, wobbling slightly but upright, for nearly 10 seconds before carefully lowering herself back into the seat. The assembled guests burst into applause, none louder than Robert, whose vision had blurred with sudden tears. "I've been practicing every day," Emma announced proudly. "Dr. Laurie says my core muscles are getting stronger." As the party continued, around him, Robert found himself momentarily overwhelmed. 6 weeks ago, he hadn't known his daughter existed. Now he couldn't imagine life without her. The transformation was so complete, so profound, that his previous existence seemed like a half-life in comparison. After cake and presents, as the party began to wind down, Robert noticed Margaret sitting, alone on his balcony, her face turned toward the winter sun. He joined her, concern mounting as he observed her drawn features more closely. "You should have told me you weren't feeling well," he said gently. "We could have postponed." Margaret shook her head. "And disappoint Emma? Never." She sighed, her breath creating a small cloud in the cold air. "Besides, there's always something these days. A cold that won't quite clear, fatigue that never fully lifts. It's just age catching up with me." "Have you seen a doctor?" Robert pressed. "Next week," Margaret conceded. "And before you offer, yes, I'll accept a referral to whatever specialist you think is best. I've learned not to argue with you about medical matters." There was a hint of fond exasperation in her tone. Robert smiled slightly. Wise decision. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching through the glass doors as Emma showed her school friends the spectacular view of Boston Harbor from the penthouse windows. "She's happy," Margaret observed. "Truly happy. Not just today, but these past weeks. You've been good for her, Robert." The simple acknowledgement meant more to him than any business accolade ever had. "She's been better for me." "Sarah would be pleased," Margaret added quietly. "She always said you had greatness in you, but that you might need someone to show you it wasn't just about achievement." Robert felt the familiar pang that accompanied any mention of Sarah, regret mingled with gratitude. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately, wondering what she would make of the man I've become." "I think she'd recognize the man she always believed you could be," Margaret replied. "The one who was there all along beneath the ambition and the drive for success." Before Robert could respond, they were interrupted by Emma, wheeling herself onto the balcony, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Dad, Grandma, this is the best birthday ever," she exclaimed. "And guess what? Sophia's mom says I can have a sleepover at their house next weekend. They have a ramp and everything." The mention of a sleepover, such a normal childhood milestone, hit Robert with unexpected force. It represented a world of experiences that had seemed potentially closed to Emma because of her condition, now opening through friendship and acceptance. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Margaret replied. "If you're sure you're ready for a whole night away." "I am," Emma declared confidently, "and Dad can pick me up the next morning and take me to the Science Museum like he promised." She looked between them with sudden concern. "Is that okay? With the schedule?" The schedules, carefully worked out between Robert and Margaret, allocated Emma's time between her grandmother's apartment and Robert's penthouse, with gradually increasing overnight stays with her father. That Emma was now conscious of coordinating between her two homes represented both progress and complexity. "We'll make it work," Robert assured her, exchanging a glance with Margaret. "Your grandmother and I are pretty good at figuring things out together now." Emma beamed, satisfied, then wheeled back inside to rejoin her friends. Once she was out of earshot, Margaret turned to Robert with a more serious expression. "There's something we need to discuss," she said, her voice lower. "Something I've been putting off because I didn't want to complicate things while you and Emma were still getting to know each other." Robert felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "Sarah left letters," Margaret revealed. "Many letters written to you over the years. Some from when she was pregnant, some from when Emma was a baby, some from—" She paused, gathering herself. "Some from when she knew she wouldn't be around to raise Emma." Robert stared at her, stunned. "Letters? To me?" Margaret nodded. "She never sent them, obviously, but she kept writing to you almost like a journal, telling you about Emma's milestones, about her thoughts, her hopes for Emma's future." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small key. "They're in a box in my apartment. I think it's time you read them." Robert accepted the key with an unsteady hand, its weight seemingly disproportionate to its size. "Why now?" "Because you've proven yourself," Margaret said simply. "You've become the father Sarah always believed you could be, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I think you both need closure. Sarah never stopped loving you, Robert, and I think in your way you never stopped loving her either. Before Robert could process this revelation, they were interrupted again, this time by Jason, diplomatically informing them that several guests were preparing to leave. The conversation suspended. They returned inside to fulfill their hosting duties, but the key burned in Robert's pocket like a live coal. Later, after the last guest had departed, and Emma had fallen asleep in the bedroom Robert had designed especially for her in his penthouse, he stood at the window watching snow begin to fall over Boston. The day had been perfect, seeing Emma's joy, witnessing her progress, feeling the pieces of their unconventional family fitting together with increasing comfort. Yet Margaret's revelation about Sarah's letters had unsettled something deep within him. For weeks, he'd been focused entirely on the present and future, on building a relationship with Emma, on restructuring his life to accommodate fatherhood, on medical treatments and legal arrangements and educational plans. Now, the past beckoned, offering insights he both craved and feared. What had Sarah truly thought of him? What had she wanted to tell him over those years of separation? And could he bear to hear her voice again through her written words, knowing he would never be able to respond? The snow fell more heavily, transforming the city below into a white dreamscape. In his pocket, the key to Sarah's letters waited, a bridge between the man he had been and the father he was becoming. Rain pounded against the windows of Margaret's apartment as Robert sat alone at the kitchen table, a wooden box open before him. Emma was at her weekly physical therapy session, and Margaret had tactfully excused herself to visit a neighbor, giving Robert privacy for what they both knew would be an emotional reckoning. The box contained dozens of envelopes, each labeled with a date spanning the 15 years since Sarah had left Boston. With trembling fingers, Robert selected the earliest one, postmarked just weeks after their separation. "Dear Robert," Sarah's handwriting flowed across the page, at once familiar and strange. "I'm sitting in a tiny apartment in New York, wondering if I've made the biggest mistake of my life by leaving. There's something I need to tell you, but I'm afraid of how it might change everything, afraid it might force choices neither of us is ready to make." Robert read through tears as Sarah described discovering her pregnancy, her fears about disrupting his burgeoning career, her determination to forge ahead independently. The letter ended without a clear resolution, just questions and uncertainty, echoing his own confusion from that time. He moved to the next envelope, dated 3 months later. "Dear Robert, I saw your name in the business section today. A round of funding came through. I felt such pride knowing the world is finally seeing what I always saw in you. Meanwhile, I'm throwing up every morning and craving peanut butter at midnight. Our child, yes, I've started thinking of this baby, as ours, even though you don't know about him or her yet, makes their presence known daily." Letter after letter chronicled Sarah's journey through pregnancy, her law school struggles, her hopes and fears. Robert lost track of time as he immersed himself in the parallel life that had unfolded without his knowledge. There were gaps, weeks or sometimes months between letters, but the narrative thread held strong, Sarah building a life for herself and their child, always with Robert as the silent recipient of her thoughts. Then came the letter dated, the day of Emma's birth. "Dear Robert, she's here. Our daughter arrived at 3:17 this morning after 22 hours of labor. She's perfect, 6 pounds 8 ounces, with your eyes and my chin. I've named her Emma Sarah Blackwood Thompson. My mother thinks I'm crazy for giving her your name, but I want her to carry a piece of you even if you never know her. I tried to find you again today. Called your old number, but it's disconnected. Looked for you online, but your company's website just has a general email that probably goes to an assistant. I'm beginning to think the universe is telling me something. Maybe some doors are meant to stay closed." Robert had to stop reading, overcome by the magnitude of what he'd missed. His daughter's birth, her first steps, her first words. The letters documented it all. Emma rolling over at 4 months, speaking in full sentences before she was 2, showing an early aptitude for music and art. Then the tone of the letters shifted. A letter dated shortly after Emma's 3rd birthday contained the first mention of Sarah's diagnosis. "Dear Robert, the doctors say I have time, but not as much as I'd hoped. Acute myeloid leukemia. Aggressive. Treatable. But the prognosis isn't great. All I can think about is Emma. My beautiful, brilliant girl who may have to grow up without me. I find myself wondering, if you knew about her, would you be part of her life? Would you love her as fiercely as I do? I believe you would. Despite everything, I've never doubted your capacity for love, only your awareness of it. Robert's hands shook so badly he could barely continue. The subsequent letters chronicled Sarah's rapid decline, her arrangements for Emma's future, her reflections on life and love and regret. The final letter, dated just weeks before her passing, was the most difficult to read. My dearest Robert, this will be my last letter to you, though like all the others it will never be sent. The treatments have failed and my time is measured in weeks now, not years. Emma understands something is wrong. Though at 3 she can't fully grasp what's happening. My mother will raise her. She's promised to keep your memory alive for Emma, to tell her about the brilliant, passionate man who is her father. I've never told you the real reason I left Boston all those years ago. It wasn't just about the pregnancy or fear of disrupting your future. It was because I saw in you a greatness that both awed and terrified me. You were burning so bright, so focused on changing the world, that I feared there wouldn't be room. For us, for a family, for the messy, ordinary beauty of daily life. I convinced myself I was doing you a favor by leaving, by not burdening your ascent with the weight of unexpected responsibility. I see now that was my greatest mistake. Not having faith in us, not giving you the chance to choose. I robbed you of knowing your daughter, and I robbed Emma of knowing her father. For that I can never be forgiven. If by some miracle these letters find their way to you someday, if you meet our Emma and see yourself in her determined spirit and curious mind, please know this: you were loved, completely and without reservation. And I believe with my whole heart that you would have been an extraordinary father. All my love forever, Sarah. Robert sat motionless, tears streaming down his face, the final letter clutched in his hands. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a soft percussion accompanying his grief. Not just grief for Sarah, but for the life they might have shared, for the 15 years lost with Emma. The sound of keys in the door jolted him back to the present. He hastily wiped his eyes as Margaret entered, shaking droplets from her umbrella. "You read them," she said quietly, taking in his reddened eyes and the open box. Robert nodded, unable to speak. Margaret settled into the chair across from him with a sigh. She wanted to send them, you know. Especially near the end, I was the one who discouraged her. "Why?" Robert managed to ask. No accusation in his tone, only genuine curiosity. "Fear, mostly," Margaret admitted. "Fear that you'd reject them both. Fear that you'd try to take Emma away. Fear that you'd breeze in and out of her life, leaving her with another loss." She shook her head sadly. "I was wrong, of course. But grief and fear aren't rational companions." "She tried to find me," Robert said, the revelation still staggering. "Multiple times." "She did," Margaret confirmed. "But you were moving up in the world, changing addresses, changing phone numbers. And Sarah was proud, too proud to track you down through business connections or mutual friends. She wanted you to want her, not to feel obligated." Robert carefully replaced the letters in their box, his mind whirling with all he'd learned. "Thank you for giving these to me," he said finally. "For trusting me with them." Margaret nodded, then said hesitantly, "There's one more thing Sarah left. For Emma when she's older, a video message." She paused, watching him carefully. "I think you should see it too." Before Robert could respond, the apartment door opened again, and Emma wheeled in, accompanied by her physical therapist. Her face lit up at the sight of her father. "Dad, guess what? I stood for 25 seconds today. Dr. Laurie timed it." Her excitement faltered as she registered the emotional atmosphere in the room. "Why do you look sad?" Robert forced a smile, moving to kneel beside her wheelchair. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about how much I love you." Emma studied his face with the penetrating gaze that always seemed to see right through him. "You were reading Mommy's letters, weren't you? The ones Grandma keeps in the key." "Special box." Robert glanced at Margaret, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he admitted. "Your mother wrote me many letters over the years." "Did they make you cry?" Emma asked directly. "A little," Robert acknowledged, seeing no point in hiding the truth. "Sometimes we cry when we remember people we love." Emma considered this thoughtfully. "Grandma cries sometimes when she looks at Mommy's pictures, and sometimes I do too." She reached out to touch his cheek with small, cool fingers. "It's okay to be sad, Dad. That's what you always tell me." Robert marveled at her emotional intelligence, her capacity for empathy despite her young age. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, managing a genuine smile. "I've always been wise," Emma replied with perfect seriousness. "Mommy said I was born with an old soul." The casual reference to Sarah, spoken without sadness or drama, struck Robert forcefully. For Emma, Sarah was a natural part of life, present in memory and stories. He wondered if he could learn to speak of her that way too, with love and remembrance rather than regret and pain. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Margaret and Robert sat in the living room with a laptop between them. On the screen was a video file labeled simply, "For Emma, age 12. "Are you sure you want me to see this?" Robert asked, aware that the message had been created for their daughter, not for him. "Sarah would want you to," Margaret assured him. "She made this during her last week, when she knew she wouldn't see Emma grow up. But she never knew you would find your way back to Emma's life. I think she'd want you to hear what she had to say." With a deep breath, Margaret pressed play. Sarah's face filled the screen, gaunt from illness but still beautiful. Her eyes alight with the same intelligence and warmth that Robert saw daily in Emma's expression. "Hello, my darling girl," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her evident weakness. "If you're watching this, it means you're 12 years old today. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I wish more than anything that I could be there celebrating with you, seeing the young woman you're becoming." Sarah spoke for nearly 20 minutes, about her hopes for Emma's future, about the values she hoped her daughter would embrace, about her own regrets and triumphs. She answered questions she imagined a 12-year-old might have, about boys, about friendship, about navigating the complexities of adolescence. Then, near the end, she addressed a subject that caused Robert to lean forward, hardly breathing. "Emma, there's something important I want to tell you about your father," Sarah said, her expression softening further. "By now you've heard stories about him from Grandma and from me through my journals. But there's something I've never told anyone, something I need you to know." She paused, gathering strength. "The night before I left Boston, your father and I talked about the future. He was so excited about his company, about changing the world with technology that could help people. I remember asking him if he ever thought about having a family someday. And do you know what he said?" Sarah smiled. At the memory. He said he'd never really considered it because his own childhood had been so difficult, but then he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "If I ever have children, I'd want them to know they're more important than any business success. I'd want to be the kind of father who never misses a school play or a soccer game." Tears spilled down Robert's cheeks as the memory returned to him. A late-night conversation in Sarah's apartment, planning futures that seemed distant and hypothetical. "I don't know where life has taken your father," Sarah continued on the screen. "I don't know if you'll ever meet him. But I want you to know that he had goodness in his heart, and that if circumstances had been different, I believe with all my soul that he would have loved you fiercely and completely." Sarah wiped away her own tears. "And if by some miracle he does find his way to you someday, please give him a chance, Emma. People can surprise us. Love can find its way through the most unexpected channels, and sometimes the family we build isn't the one we planned, but it's exactly the one we need." The video continued for a few more minutes, with Sarah offering final words of wisdom and love. When it ended, the room fell into profound silence. Robert sat motionless, overwhelmed by Sarah's generosity of spirit, by her faith in him, even when she had every reason to doubt. "She never blamed you," Margaret said softly. "Not once through all of it. Even when I was angry on her behalf, Sarah would say, 'It was my choice, Mom, my decision. We both lost because of it.' Robert struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "I would have," he began, then stopped, recognizing the futility of counterfactuals in the face of their shared reality. "I know," Margaret said, understanding his unfinished thought. And so did she in the end. They sat together in the quiet apartment, 3 generations connected by love and loss and unexpected redemption. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean, ready for whatever came next. "What do we do now?" Robert asked finally. Margaret closed the laptop gently. "We do what Sarah asked. We build the family Emma needs. Not the one any of us planned, but the one we have. Together." In that moment, surrounded by Sarah's words and Emma's presence even in sleep, Robert felt something shift within him. A burden lifting, a path clearing. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be honored. The future couldn't be controlled, but it could be approached with intention and love. Together, he agreed, the word both promise and prayer. Spring arrived in Boston with a gentle insistence, coaxing crocuses through the soil in the public garden and softening the harsh edges of winter. 6 months had passed since Robert had carried Emma up those fateful stairs, 6 months of profound transformation for all their lives. On this particular Saturday morning, sunshine streamed through the windows of Robert's penthouse as Emma practiced standing with her new mobility braces. The custom devices developed by Blackwood Technologies' pediatric division and now in clinical trials with children across the country provided support while encouraging muscle development. 30 seconds, Robert announced, checking the timer on his watch. "That's a new record, sweetheart." Emma beamed, carefully lowering herself back into her wheelchair with the practiced movements her physical therapist had taught her. "Next time I'll try for 45, she declared, her determination unwavering. "One step at a time," Robert reminded her, using the phrase that had become something of a family motto. "Remember what Dr. Laurie said about not pushing too hard." I know," Emma sighed with the mild exasperation of a child who's heard the same caution many times. "But the spring concert is in 3 weeks, and I want to stand for my whole solo." The concert had become Emma's obsession, her debut performance singing with the children's choir at the Boston Symphony's community outreach program. The director had offered her a seated position, but Emma had insisted on standing for her 16-measure solo, a goal that had driven her therapy sessions for months. "You'll be amazing whether you're sitting or standing," Robert assured her, handing her a glass of water. "It's your voice they're coming to hear, not your posture." Emma took a sip, then fixed him with the direct gaze that never failed to remind him of Sarah. "Dad, remember what you told that reporter who asked if your company could compete with the big tech firms?" Robert smiled, recognizing his own words coming back to him. "That limitations are just invitations to innovation?" "Exactly," Emma said triumphantly. "So my wheelchair is just an invitation to innovation, and I'm innovating by standing for my solo." Laughing, Robert shook his head in amused surrender. "I should know better than to argue with logic, that sound." The penthouse intercom chimed, announcing Margaret's arrival. In the months since Robert had read Sarah's letters, his relationship with Emma's grandmother had evolved into a deep partnership. Margaret's initial health concerns had been diagnosed as anemia and an easily treatable thyroid condition, and with proper medical care, her energy had returned, allowing her to fully participate in their unconventional family arrangement. "Good morning." "You too," Margaret greeted as she entered, bringing the scent of the bakery with her. "I brought those croissants Emma's been craving." "Grandma!" Emma wheeled toward her excitedly. "I stood for 30 seconds with the new braces." "Wonderful. Sweetheart," Margaret praised, setting down the bakery box to embrace her granddaughter. "You'll be running marathons before we know it." While Emma attacked the croissants, Robert and Margaret moved to the kitchen, speaking in lowered voices. "How did the meeting go yesterday?" Margaret asked, referring to Robert's latest consultation with Emma's medical team. "Encouraging," he replied, pouring coffee for them both. "The new medication protocol is showing significant results. Dr. Maxwell believes Emma might maintain independence well into adulthood, possibly with limited walking ability." Margaret exhaled slowly. relief evident in her expression. When they'd first received Emma's diagnosis as a toddler, the prognosis had been far more limiting. Sarah would be amazed at how medical science has advanced in just a few years. Much of it is timing, Robert acknowledged, the businessman in him always aware of market forces. SMA treatments have become a focus for research funding. Emma's benefiting from breakthroughs that weren't available even 2 years ago. What he didn't add, though Margaret surely knew, was how much of that research funding now came from the Blackwood Foundation, the non-profit he'd established 3 months ago, dedicated to pediatric mobility disorders. The foundation represented a significant pivot in Robert's professional life, one that had raised eyebrows in the business community, but had felt instinctively right to him. The lawyer called, Margaret mentioned, changing the subject. The adoption paperwork is ready for final review. Robert nodded, feeling the familiar mix of emotions that accompanied any major step in legally securing his relationship with Emma. The process of establishing paternity had been straightforward, DNA testing confirming what they already knew. But the legal adoption represented something more complex. Robert formally acknowledging his commitment to Emma as her father, with all the responsibilities that entailed. "I'll review it this weekend," he promised. "Did he mention anything about the name change petition?" "It's included in the package," Margaret confirmed. "Once everything's filed, Emma can legally be Emma Blackwood." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Robert checked his watch, surprised. That must be Patricia, she's early. His COO had become a regular presence in their weekend routine, often joining them for Saturday brunches before she and Robert would spend a few hours on company business while Emma had her therapy session. The arrangement allowed Robert to maintain his leadership role at Blackwood Technologies while protecting his family time. But when Robert opened the door, it wasn't Patricia who stood in the hallway, but Jason, Robert's assistant, looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to interrupt your weekend, but there's been a development with the Harper acquisition. The board is requesting an emergency meeting." Robert frowned. The acquisition of Harper Medical Technologies, a company specializing in pediatric rehabilitation equipment, had been in the works for months, a cornerstone of Blackwood Technologies' strategic shift toward medical innovation. "What happened?" "Rival bid," Jason explained succinctly. "Significantly higher than ours. The Harper board is meeting this afternoon to consider it." 6 months ago, Robert would have immediately grabbed his jacket, cancelled all plans, and headed to the office, without a second thought. Business emergencies had always taken precedence over everything else in his life, not that there had been much else to take precedence over. Now, he glanced back at Emma, happily chatting with her grandmother over croissants, and felt the momentary pull of competing priorities. "Dad, is everything okay?" Emma called, noticing his expression. Robert made a decision. "Jason, tell the board I'll join remotely in 30 minutes. Have Patricia prepare the updated valuation models we discussed last week, and call Harper's CEO directly, remind him that our integration plan preserves all their research staff positions, unlike our competitors." As Jason nodded and retreated to make the calls, Robert turned back to Emma. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a work situation I need to handle. But it won't affect our plans for the botanical garden this afternoon." Emma studied him with her perceptive gaze. "Is it the Harper company? The one that makes the cool leg braces?" Robert smiled despite the situation. Emma had developed an impressive understanding of his business over the months, particularly the medical technology aspects that related to her own condition. "Yes, it is. Another company is trying to buy them instead of us." Emma considered, "This seriously? But your company would be better for them, right? Because you actually care about helping kids like me, not just making money." The simple statement captured the fundamental shift in Robert's business philosophy over the past 6 months, a shift that had initially alarmed his board, but had ultimately led to a more focused, purpose-driven strategy that was already showing promising financial results. "That's exactly right," Robert agreed, "and that's what I'm going to remind everyone of in this meeting." While Robert set up his video conference in the home office, Margaret helped Emma prepare for her therapy session. Through the open door, he could hear them discussing Emma's upcoming school science project, something about the solar system that had sparked her endless curiosity about stars and planets. As executives and board members appeared on his screen, Robert felt the strange juxtaposition of his two worlds, the corporate realm he had once inhabited exclusively, and the family life that now formed the center of his existence. Rather than feeling torn between them, he found they informed each other. His business decisions now filtered through the lens of what kind of world he wanted to create for Emma and children like her. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began when everyone had joined, "I understand we're facing a competing bid for Harper. Before we discuss numbers, I want to remind everyone why this acquisition matters beyond the financial statements." The meeting lasted longer than anticipated, but by its conclusion, Robert had secured the board's approval for an enhanced offer that emphasized Blackwood Technologies' commitment to maintaining Harper's research initiatives and staff, a commitment their competitor notably lacked. The board chair, initially skeptical of Robert's more mission-driven approach, had become one of its strongest advocates, as quarterly results demonstrated that purpose and profit could coexist. When Robert emerged from his office, he found Emma and Margaret preparing to leave for therapy. "All good?" Margaret asked, helping Emma with her jacket. "I think so," Robert replied. "We're submitting a revised offer that I believe will be accepted." He knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. "Your therapy session should be done by noon, right? I'll meet you both at the Botanical Garden main entrance at 12:30. "Promise?" Emma asked, holding out her pinky finger, a ritual they had established for serious commitments. "Promise," Robert confirmed, linking his much larger pinky with hers. "Nothing will keep me from seeing those new butterfly exhibits with you." After they left, Robert handled a few follow-up calls related to the Harper situation, then changed into more casual clothes for their afternoon outing. As he selected a sweater, a bright blue one Emma had helped him choose, claiming his wardrobe needed more happy colors, his phone chimed with a text message from Patricia. Harper's CEO called. "They're accepting our revised offer. Contract." "Hey, tomorrow. You were right about emphasizing the research preservation angle." Robert smiled, satisfaction warming him. Not just satisfaction at the business victory, but at what it represented. The alignment of his company's direction with values that truly mattered to him now. His phone rang almost immediately after the text, Patricia's name appearing on the screen. "Congratulations," she said when he answered. "The board is thrilled. This positions us perfectly in the pediatric mobility sector. Thanks for your work on this," Robert replied, gathering his keys. "The financial model you developed made a compelling case." "This company has changed," Patricia observed, not for the first time. 6 months ago, we would have been focused solely on Harper's patent portfolio and how quickly we could integrate their manufacturing with ours. Now we're talking about research preservation and patient outcomes in the same breath as profit margins. "Is that a complaint?" Robert asked, though he knew it wasn't. "Quite the opposite," Patricia assured him. "Morale is higher than I've ever seen it. The pediatric division is attracting top talent, and the market is responding positively to our more focused mission." She paused briefly. "Emma has been good for Blackwood Technologies, Robert, not just for you." The observation struck him as profoundly true. His daughter had transformed not only his personal life, but his professional legacy as well, steering his company toward work with more meaningful impact. "Speaking of Emma," Patricia continued, "how are preparations for the big concert coming along?" "Intensive," Robert chuckled. "She's determined to stand for her solo, practicing with those new braces every day." "She'll do it," Patricia said with confidence. "She's got your determination." After ending the call, Robert headed toward the parking garage, but on impulse, decided to walk to the Botanical Garden instead. It was only 15 blocks, and the spring day was too beautiful to waste. As he walked through Boston's historic streets, Robert found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. From the solitary, work-obsessed billionaire he had been to the father he was becoming, the transformation still amazed him daily. There had been challenges, of course, learning to co-parent with Margaret, navigating Emma's medical needs, restructuring his work life to prioritize family time. None of it had been simple. There had been missteps and disagreements, moments of doubt and fear, but there had also been joy, profound, unexpected joy that ambushed him at the most ordinary moments. Emma's laughter during their weekly movie nights, the proud gleam in her eye when she mastered a new skill, the quiet evenings when the three of them, Robert, Emma, and Margaret, sat in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own activities yet fundamentally connected. As Robert approached the botanical garden, he saw them waiting by the entrance, Margaret seated on a bench, Emma in her wheelchair beside her, both enjoying the spring sunshine. Emma spotted him first, her face lighting up with the unguarded delight that never failed to humble him. "Dad, you're early," she called, waving enthusiastically. "I walked," he explained as he reached them. "It was too nice a day not to." "Did you win your business fight?" Emma asked as they entered the garden, her vocabulary for corporate negotiations endearingly simplified. "We did," Robert confirmed. "The company that makes those special leg braces will be joining our company now." "Good," Emma declared with satisfaction. "Now you can make them in purple. I told you purple would be better than black." Robert laughed, exchanging an amused glance with Margaret. "I'll make that a top priority for the design team." As they moved through the garden, Robert pushing Emma's wheelchair along the accessible paths while Margaret walked beside them, he was struck by how natural this felt now. This family they had created, unconventional but undeniably strong. They reached the butterfly pavilion, a glass-enclosed space filled with tropical plants and hundreds of butterflies in riotous colors. Emma's eyes widened with wonder as they entered the humid environment, butterflies fluttering freely around them. "Look!" she gasped, as a large blue morpho butterfly landed on the arm of her wheelchair. "It's saying hello." As Robert watched, his daughter's face alight with joy and curiosity, he thought of Sarah. He wished desperately that she could see this moment, Emma's delight, the family they had become. But in a way, he realized, Sarah was present, in Emma's smile, in her thoughtful questions, in her compassionate heart. Later, as they sat in the garden cafe, Emma animatedly describing the butterflies to an elderly couple at the next table, Margaret leaned toward Robert. "I've been meaning to tell you something," she said quietly. "I found another of Sarah's journals last week, one I hadn't seen before. It was from right after Emma was born." Robert waited, heart quickening slightly. "There was an entry about naming Emma," Margaret continued. "Sarah wrote that she gave Emma your name because she believed that somehow, someday, you two would find each other. That some connections are too strong to be denied by time or distance." Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. "She was right," he managed after a moment. "Though I wish we'd found each other sooner." Margaret placed her hand over his briefly. "You found each other exactly when you were meant to." As they left the botanical garden, Emma asked to try using her new leg braces to walk a short distance along the paved path. With Robert on one side and Margaret on the other, Emma took 17 steps, wobbly but determined, her face a study in concentration. 17! She exclaimed when they helped her back into her wheelchair. "That's 5 more than yesterday." "1 step at a time," Robert and Margaret said in unison, then laughed at the jinx. Emma looked between them, her expression suddenly thoughtful. "You know what? I think Mommy would be really happy right now, seeing us all together like this." The simple observation, offered with a child's unfiltered honesty, brought unexpected tears to Robert's eyes. "I think you're right, sweetheart," he agreed, his voice husky with emotion. "I think she would be very happy indeed." As they made their way home through the spring afternoon, Robert reflected on the strange, wonderful path that had led him here. A chance encounter on a staircase, a secret revealed by a little girl in a pink beanie, letters never sent, but somehow delivered exactly when they needed to be read. He had spent decades building his business empire, believing success could be measured in acquisitions and stock prices. Now he understood that the true measure of a life well lived was something far simpler and infinitely more profound. The love we give, the connections we nurture, the difference we make in the lives that touch our own. Emma's hand found his as they waited at a crosswalk, her small fingers curling trustingly around his. In that simple gesture lay everything that mattered: the promise of tomorrow, the healing of yesterday, and the perfect, precious gift of today. "Dad," Emma said as they crossed the street together, "I've been thinking about my science project. What if instead of just showing the planets, I make a model of how gravity works, like how invisible forces hold everything together, even when they seem far apart?" Robert smiled down at his daughter, recognizing in her question a truth that applied to far more than celestial bodies. "I think that's a perfect idea, Emma. Some connections are powerful enough to transcend any distance." Above them, the spring skies stretched blue and limitless, while around them the city pulsed with life and possibility. And within them,